Captain Zexathar had seen death in 1,000 forms across the galaxy. His scarred blue hide told stories of battles fought alongside the most feared warriors in known space. The Krillian death squads with their razor claws, the gas-breathing Vorthak who could melt steel with their breath, the massive Gornathi whose footsteps cracked planets. But nothing had prepared him for the day humans arrived in Sector 7. Zexthar stood on the bridge of the starship Crimson Talon, watching the tactical display with growing concern. Red dots swarmed across the screen like angry insects. The Zarathi hive fleet had broken through the outer defenses 3 days ago, and now they were less than 2 hours from the mining colony on Kepler 442b. "Sir, we're receiving distress signals from 17 different ships," reported Lieutenant Cora, her tentacles dancing nervously over the communication console. "The entire third battle group has been destroyed. The Zarathi are using some kind of new weapon that turns our own shields against us." Zexthar's 4 eyes narrowed as he studied the battle reports. The Zarathi were bad news on any day, but this was different. These weren't the usual hit-and-run tactics. This was a coordinated assault designed to wipe out everything in its path. The mining colony housed over 50,000 civilians from a dozen different species. Families, children, scientists working on projects that could change the future of the galaxy. If the Zarathi reached them, it would be a massacre unlike anything seen in decades. "What reinforcements do we have available?" Zexthar asked, though he already knew the answer would disappoint him. "The 7th Fleet is 3 days out, sir. The Mandorian Iron Guard is dealing with pirates in the Outer Rim. We have 2 squadrons of Vorthak fighters and a single Gornathi dreadnought en route, but they won't arrive for at least 6 hours. 6 hours. Zexthar's tail lashed behind him in frustration. The colony would be space dust in 2. That's when the communications array crackled to life with a transmission unlike anything they'd ever received. "This is Captain Sarah Chen of the Terran Defense Force destroyer Indomitable. We're responding to your distress call." Silence fell across the bridge. Every crew member turned to stare at the main screen, where a strange vessel materialized out of what seemed like empty space. It was smaller than their own ship, built with clean lines and an almost delicate appearance compared to the massive, intimidating warships they were used to seeing. "Terran?" whispered Communications Officer Drac, his scaled face showing confusion. "I've never heard of that species." Zexthar hadn't either. In 30 years of military service, he'd encountered hundreds of alien races, but Terran wasn't in any of his databases. "Captain Chen," Zexthar responded carefully, "I appreciate your offer of assistance, but you should know what you're facing. The Zarathi Hive fleet consists of over 200 warships, including 4 massive biocarriers. Their new weapons have destroyed every force we've sent against them. Perhaps you should fall back and wait for proper reinforcements." A laugh came through the speakers, an actual laugh. Zexthar had heard many sounds in combat, but laughter wasn't usually one of them. "Captain Zexthar, we've been monitoring your communications. 200 ships? That's cute. We brought 3. 3 ships, against a hive fleet that had just destroyed an entire battle group. Zexthar was beginning to think these Terrans were either completely insane or had some kind of death wish. "Captain Chen, I don't think you understand the severity of the situation. The Zarathi bioships are living creatures the size of small moons. Their weapon systems adapt in real time to whatever you throw at them. They've been conquering worlds for over 1,000 years. "Yeah, we read the briefings," came the casual reply. "Bioadaptive technology, rapid evolution capabilities, hive-mind coordination. Impressive stuff. We've dealt with worse." "Worse?" Zexthar exchanged glances with his crew. What could possibly be worse than the Zarathi? On the tactical display, 2 more human ships appeared near the first one. They moved with an odd, almost lazy grace that seemed completely inappropriate for a war zone. No aggressive posturing, no dramatic weapon deployments. They just hung there in space like they were waiting for something interesting to happen. "Captain!" Lieutenant Cora called out, her voice tight with worry. "The Zarathi Vanguard is entering the system. 47 bioships led by a Queen-class carrier. They'll reach the colony in 93 minutes. Zexthar made his decision. "All ships, prepare for battle. We'll buy as much time as possible for the evacuation shuttles." He opened a channel to the human vessels. "Captain Chen, I strongly advise you to retreat. We'll cover your withdrawal." "That's very thoughtful of you, Captain, but we've got this. You might want to pull your ships back, though. Things are about to get a bit messy." A bit messy? 3 tiny ships against nearly 50 bio-warships, and she was worried about making a mess? Zexthar was about to respond when the lead human ship did something impossible. It accelerated directly toward the incoming Zarathi fleet at a speed that should have torn it apart. The other 2 ships followed, spreading out in a formation that seemed almost playful. "Sir," gasped the tactical officer, "I'm reading massive energy buildups from all 3 human vessels. Whatever they're planning, it's using power levels I've never seen before." The first contact happened exactly 17 minutes later. A Zarathi scout ship, roughly the size of a city block, encountered the lead human destroyer at the edge of the system. Zexthar watched on the long-range sensors as the bioship immediately began adapting its defenses, its living hull shifting and changing to counter expected attacks. The human ship fired once. The Zarathi scout ship simply ceased to exist, not destroyed, not damaged, not torn apart. It was there one moment and gone the next, leaving behind only expanding clouds of matter so small they barely registered on sensors. "What the hell was that?" Zexthar whispered. On the tactical display, the human ships continued their approach. More Zarathi vessels moved to intercept them, their biohulls glowing with adaptive energy as they prepared to overwhelm the tiny force. The humans opened fire in earnest. What followed wasn't a battle. Battles implied that both sides had a chance. This was something else entirely. Streams of energy erupted from the human ships, each shot precisely targeted and utterly devastating. Zarathi bioships that had withstood the combined firepower of entire fleets were reduced to component atoms in milliseconds. The most terrifying part was how methodical it all looked. No wild spraying of weapons, no desperate maneuvers. The humans moved through the Zarathi formation like surgeons performing a delicate operation, cutting away diseased tissue with absolute precision. "Sir," the tactical officer's voice was barely a whisper, "the lead human ship is heading directly for the Queen carrier." The Queen carrier was the crown jewel of any Zarathi fleet, a living mountain of bioengineered death. Covered in adaptive armor that could evolve new defenses faster than most computers could process information, its weapons had cracked moons and sterilized entire star systems. The human destroyer approached it like a predator stalking prey. The Queen carrier unleashed everything it had: plasma torrents that could melt asteroids, gravity weapons that twisted space itself, bioelectric discharges that had previously overwhelmed the shields of dreadnoughts. The human ship didn't even slow down. It flew directly through the barrage as if the weapons weren't there, its hull shimmering with some kind of energy field that seemed to simply ignore the most powerful attacks in the Zarathi arsenal. When it reached the Queen carrier, the human ship extended what looked like a small antenna from its hull. Just a tiny probe, no bigger than a person. The probe touched the Queen carrier's hull for exactly 2.3 seconds. The entire bioship convulsed once, then went completely still. Dead in space, a living mountain turned into an inert piece of organic matter in less time than it took to blink. "What did they do?" Lieutenant Cora whispered. Zexthar couldn't answer. He didn't have words for what he'd just witnessed. The remaining Zarathi ships, apparently as shocked as everyone else, attempted to retreat. The humans didn't pursue with dramatic chases or flashy displays of speed. They simply appeared wherever the fleeing ships were trying to go, as if they could predict exactly where each vessel would attempt to escape. The entire engagement lasted exactly 27 minutes. When it was over, 47 Zarathi bioships had been reduced to scattered particles and one dead queen carrier. The 3 human ships regrouped near the Crimson Talon, apparently none the worse for wear. "Captain Zexthar," came Captain Chen's voice over the comm, still sounding as casual as if she'd just finished a routine patrol. "The immediate threat has been neutralized. We're detecting several more Zarathi formations in nearby systems. We'll go clean those up as well. The colony should be safe now." Zexthar found his voice after several attempts. "Captain Chen, what you just did, how is that possible? The Zarathi have been terrorizing this sector for months. Our best tacticians said it would take a coordinated assault by at least 6 fleet groups to stop them." "Oh, that? Yeah, they're tricky opponents. Adaptive biotechnology, hive mind coordination, rapid evolution. Very impressive for a species that's only been doing interstellar warfare for 1,000 years or so." Only been doing it for 1,000 years? What kind of perspective did these humans have? "Captain," Zexthar asked carefully, "how long has your species been engaged in interstellar warfare?" There was a pause. When Captain Chen spoke again, her voice carried a note of something that might have been amusement. "Captain Zexthar, we haven't been engaged in interstellar warfare. This is our first time leaving our home system for military purposes." The bridge went silent. Zexthar felt something cold settle in his stomach. "Your first time?" he managed. "That's right. We just developed faster-than-light travel about 6 months ago. This is essentially our maiden voyage. We heard there were some problems with hostile aliens in this part of the galaxy, so we figured we'd come take a look." Maiden voyage. First time in space. And they'd just casually destroyed a Zarathi hive fleet like it was target practice. "Captain Chen," Zexathar's voice was steady despite the growing fear in his chest. "What kind of warfare has your species been engaged in?" Another pause. Longer this time. "Captain Zexathar, for the last 4,000 years, we've been engaged in warfare against ourselves. Planet-bound, limited to one world, fighting with increasingly sophisticated weapons and tactics. When we finally ran out of ways to kill each other efficiently, we decided to look outward." The implications hit Zexthar like a physical blow. A species that had spent 4 millennia perfecting the art of war on a single world. That had developed technology capable of casually destroying bioadaptive ships as their first attempt at space combat. "The weapons you used?" he asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. "Are they considered powerful by your standards? These old things?" Captain Chen laughed again, and this time the sound made Zexthar's scales crawl. "Oh no, these are just what we had lying around. Mostly converted mining equipment and some basic defensive systems. We didn't want to bring anything too dangerous on our first trip out." Basic defensive systems. Converted mining equipment. Zexathar looked around at his crew, seeing his own growing horror reflected in their faces. They'd all served with the most dangerous species in the galaxy. They'd faced nightmares that had conquered star systems and toppled empires. But now they were talking to something that made all of those nightmares look like children playing with toys. "Captain Chen," Zexthar said very carefully, "thank you for your assistance. The colony is grateful for your intervention." "No problem at all, Captain. Always happy to help out the neighbors. We'll be heading back to Earth soon to file our reports. I'm sure the Defense Council will be very interested in what we've found out here." Defense Council. Reports. As if this had all been some kind of reconnaissance mission. As the 3 human ships began moving away from the system, Zexathar found himself wondering what those reports would say. What recommendations would be made by beings who could turn the galaxy's most feared warriors into cosmic dust with converted mining equipment. He thought about the colony below. Now safe, because these humans had decided to be helpful neighbors. He thought about the casual way they'd spoken about warfare, about their first time in space, about weapons they considered basic and old. Most of all, he thought about what might happen if these helpful neighbors ever decided to stop being quite so neighborly. For the first time in 30 years of military service, Captain Zexthar began to understand what true fear felt like. 3 weeks after the Zarathi incident, Captain Zexthar found himself stationed at Nexus Prime, the largest military coordination center in the galaxy. What should have been a routine debriefing had turned into something much more significant when word of the human encounter reached the Galactic Defense Council. The massive station buzzed with activity as representatives from every major military power gathered for an emergency session. Zexthar had never seen so many different species in one place, all united by a single concern: what to do about the humans. "The data you've provided is troubling," Admiral Kethvar said, his massive Gornathi frame casting a shadow across the conference table. "If your sensor readings are accurate, these humans possess technology that makes our most advanced weapons look primitive." Zexthar nodded grimly. "I've been fighting in these sectors for 3 decades, sir. I've seen the worst the galaxy has to offer. The humans made the Zarathi look like an inconvenience." Around the table, military leaders from across known space shifted uncomfortably. General Thax, of the Mandorian Iron Guard, whose forces had conquered 17 systems in the last year alone. High Commander Vexnil of the Krillian Death Squads, whose very name struck fear into civilian populations. War Speaker Gorthmar of the Vorthak Confederacy, whose ships had broken siege lines that had held for decades. All of them were afraid. "The question," said Admiral Kethvar slowly, "is whether they represent a threat to galactic stability." "With respect, sir," interrupted Commander Zilth of the Deep Space Intelligence Corps, "I think the real question is whether we can afford to assume they don't." A series of holographic displays materialized above the conference table, showing detailed analyses of the human weapons and tactics. The images were disturbing enough, but the conclusions were worse. "According to our best estimates," Commander Zilth continued, "the energy output we observed from their basic weapons exceeds anything in our current arsenals by a factor of 50 to 1. Their ships moved at speeds that should have been impossible without tearing themselves apart. And most concerning of all, they demonstrated technology that could shut down bioadaptive systems instantaneously." General Thax leaned forward. "How many ships do they have?" "Unknown. We've only confirmed 3 vessels, but there could be hundreds more, maybe thousands. Our intelligence networks have no information about their home system or military capabilities." War Speaker Gorthmar's breathing apparatus hissed as he spoke. "In my experience, when an unknown force appears with superior technology and unknown numbers, the wise response is to strike first and investigate later." A murmur of agreement ran around the table, but Zexthar found himself speaking before he'd really considered the wisdom of contradicting some of the most dangerous beings in the galaxy. "With respect, War Speaker, I don't think that's an option." The room went quiet. Gorthmar's 6 eyes focused on Zexthar with the kind of attention that had preceded the destruction of several planets. "Explain." Zexthar felt sweat beading on his hide, but he pressed on. "Based on what I observed, striking first would require us to know where they are. Their ships appeared out of nowhere and vanished just as quickly. Even if we could find them, their defensive capabilities suggest that a conventional assault would be suicide." "Then what do you suggest?" Admiral Kethvar asked. "I suggest we try talking to them." The silence that followed was so complete that Zexthar could hear the station's life support systems humming in the walls. "Talking," General Thax said flatly. "Yes, sir. They seemed reasonable, almost friendly. Captain Chen was casual, helpful, even polite. If they'd wanted to demonstrate dominance or issue threats, they had the perfect opportunity. Instead, they saved a civilian colony and left." War Speaker Gorthmar made a sound that might have been laughter, though it came out more like industrial machinery grinding to a halt. You want to negotiate with a species that can apparently destroy our fleets with mining equipment. I want to avoid a war with a species that can apparently destroy our fleets with mining equipment, Zexathar replied. Admiral Kethvar studied the tactical displays for several long minutes. Commander Zilth, what's your assessment of their intentions? Unclear, sir. Their behavior suggests they're either genuinely benevolent or sophisticated enough to appear benevolent while gathering intelligence. Either possibility is concerning for different reasons. Explain. If they're genuinely benevolent, it implies a level of technological advancement combined with social stability that we've never encountered. Species that develop that kind of destructive capability usually tear themselves apart long before they achieve stable interstellar travel. And if they're not genuinely benevolent, then we're dealing with a species sophisticated enough to conduct long-term intelligence gathering while appearing helpful. That level of strategic thinking, combined with their demonstrated technological superiority, would make them virtually impossible to defend against. Admiral Kethvar's expression grew even more grim. What do we know about their home system? Very little. They mentioned a place called Earth and referred to something called the Defense Council, but those terms don't appear in any of our databases. The star charts they'd need to reach the Kepler system suggest they originated somewhere in the Perseus Arm, but that's a big volume of space. General Thax spoke up. How do we even know they told the truth about this being their first time in space? It could have been deliberate misinformation. Zexathar considered this. It's possible, sir, but their tactics didn't feel like those of an experienced spacefaring military. They moved like they were experimenting, trying to see what would happen. An experienced force would have been more efficient. More efficient? War Speaker Gorthmar's breathing apparatus wheezed. They destroyed an entire Zerathi hive fleet in 27 minutes. Yes, sir, but they took 27 minutes to do it. Based on the power levels I observed, they could have wiped out everything in the system in seconds if they'd wanted to. Instead, they seemed to be testing different approaches, seeing how various weapons and tactics performed. The implications hung in the air like a toxic cloud. If the humans had been experimenting during their encounter with the Zerathi, what did that say about their actual capabilities? Recommendation? Admiral Kethvar asked. Commander Zilth activated another series of displays. We have 3 options. First, attempt to establish diplomatic contact and hope they remain friendly. Second, try to locate their home system and launch a preemptive strike with everything we have. Third, begin immediate preparations for total evacuation of the core systems. Evacuation? General Thax sounded incredulous. Sir, if our analysis is correct, traditional military responses may not be viable. If they decide we're a threat, our best option might be to scatter across the galaxy and hope they lose interest. The room fell silent again as the implications sank in. These were military leaders who had spent their careers facing impossible odds and finding ways to win. The idea of strategic evacuation as the primary option was almost unthinkable. Admiral Kethvar made his decision. We'll try diplomacy first. Captain Zexathar, you'll lead a small diplomatic mission back to the Kepler system. Try to re-establish contact and arrange formal communications. Sir, with respect, shouldn't we send someone with more diplomatic experience? Captain, you're the only being in this room who has successfully interacted with them without being killed. That makes you our most qualified diplomat. Zexathar felt his stomach sink. What if they've changed their minds about being friendly? Then you'll probably have just enough time to send us a very brief message before you cease to exist, Admiral Kethvar replied. But someone has to take the risk. The alternative is starting a war we can't win against an enemy we can't find. 2 days later, Zexathar found himself aboard a small diplomatic vessel. Approaching the Kepler system with a crew of volunteers who had either been very brave or very stupid when they'd agreed to the mission. The ship was loaded with every type of communication equipment the galaxy's best technicians could provide, along with detailed cultural and historical databases about every known species. The hope was that if they could establish meaningful dialogue, they might find some common ground. The fear was that they were about to deliver themselves to beings who could turn them into their component atoms without breaking conversation. "Sir," reported Lieutenant Cora, who had insisted on volunteering for the mission despite Zexathar's attempts to dissuade her, "we're detecting 3 human vessels at the edge of the system. Same configuration as before." Zexathar took a deep breath. "Open communications. Let's see if they remember us." The response came immediately. "Captain Zexathar, good to see you again. This is Captain Chen on the Indomitable. What brings you back to our little corner of the galaxy?" The casual friendliness in her voice was somehow more unsettling than threats would have been. Zexathar had spent days preparing for this conversation, working with diplomatic experts to craft careful phrases that would convey respect without appearing weak, curiosity without seeming invasive. "Captain Chen, thank you for taking our call. I'm here representing the Galactic Defense Council. We'd like to formally thank your people for their assistance with the Exarathi situation and explore the possibility of establishing diplomatic relations." "Diplomatic relations? That's exciting. We'd love to chat. Fair warning, though. We're still pretty new to this whole interstellar diplomacy thing. You might have to be patient with us while we figure out the protocols." New to diplomacy. Just like they'd been new to space travel and space warfare, Zexathar was beginning to notice a pattern that made his scales itch with anxiety. "We'd be happy to help with any protocols, Captain. Perhaps we could arrange a meeting. Our representatives are very interested in learning more about your people." "Sure thing. Actually, this is perfect timing. We've got a diplomatic team here from Earth who are supposed to be learning about galactic politics and alien cultures. They'll be thrilled to meet you." A diplomatic team, learning about galactic politics, as if they were studying a particularly interesting academic subject. "That sounds excellent, Captain Chen. Would it be possible to arrange a meeting on neutral ground, perhaps on one of the orbital facilities around Kepler 442b? "Oh, we can do better than that. Why don't you come aboard our ship? We've got plenty of room, and our diplomatic team has been dying to practice their hosting skills." Come aboard their ship. Zexathar felt his crew's tension level spike. Put themselves completely at the mercy of beings who could apparently shut down their vessel with a thought. But refusing might be seen as an insult, and they were here to establish friendly relations. "That's very generous, Captain Chen. We accept your invitation." "Great. Transmitting docking coordinates now. Fair warning, our ship is designed for humans, so the gravity and atmosphere might feel a bit unusual. We can adjust things in the diplomatic quarters if needed." The docking process was unlike anything Zexathar had experienced. Instead of the usual mechanical clamps and pressurized tubes, the human ship simply enveloped their vessel in some kind of energy field that gently drew them into a hangar bay that was much larger than their ship's external dimensions should have allowed. "Spatial manipulation technology," whispered the science officer. "They're folding space inside their ship to create more room. The energy requirements for that should be impossible." When the airlock opened, Zexathar found himself facing 3 humans who looked nothing like the terrifying warriors he'd been expecting. They were small, fragile-looking beings with soft skin and friendly expressions. The one in front, wearing what appeared to be a simple blue uniform, stepped forward with a genuine smile. "Captain Zexathar, I'm Sarah Chen. So glad to finally meet you in person." She extended her hand in what appeared to be some kind of greeting ritual. Zexathar carefully extended one of his claws, and Chen shook it with the same enthusiasm she might show an old friend. Her grip was surprisingly firm for such a small creature. "Welcome aboard the Indomitable. Let me introduce you to our diplomatic team. This is Ambassador Martinez, our chief negotiator, and Dr. Thompson, our xenological specialist." Ambassador Martinez was an elderly human with gray hair and kind eyes. Dr. Thompson looked even younger than Captain Chen, with an expression of barely contained excitement. "This is incredible," Dr. Thompson said, looking at Zexthar and his crew with obvious fascination. "We've studied theoretical xenobiology for years, but meeting actual alien species is beyond anything we imagined. Your physiology is remarkable. The way your scale patterns reflect different wavelengths of light, the efficiency of your respiratory system, the neural pathways that control your locomotive appendages." "Dr. Thompson," Ambassador Martinez said gently, "perhaps we should let our guests settle in before beginning the scientific discussions." The human enthusiasm was infectious and somehow deeply disturbing at the same time. They acted like meeting alien species was the most wonderful thing that had ever happened to them, not like representatives of a military power that had just demonstrated the ability to reshape the galactic balance of power. As they were escorted through the ship's corridors, Zexthar tried to analyze what he was seeing. The technology was unlike anything in his experience, but more concerning was the attitude of the crew members they passed. Everyone seemed relaxed, curious, almost excited. No one acted like they were aboard a warship that had recently destroyed a Zerathi hive fleet. "Captain Chen," Zexthar asked carefully, "your crew seems very comfortable. Not what I'd expect from a military vessel." "Military vessel?" Chen laughed. "Oh, I can see how you'd think that. The Indomitable is actually an exploration ship. We're part of the Terran Scientific Survey, not the military, though I guess the distinction gets a bit blurry when you're dealing with hostile aliens." Scientific Survey. Exploration ship. The vessel that had casually destroyed some of the most dangerous warships in the galaxy was essentially a research platform. "When you eliminated the Zerathi fleet," Zexthar said slowly, "was that using military weapons?" "Oh, no," Dr. Thompson replied cheerfully. "Those were just our standard defensive systems. Every exploration ship carries them in case we run into dangerous wildlife or hostile environments. The weapons division back home would probably be embarrassed that we had to use such basic equipment." Basic equipment. Standard defensive systems. Zexthar felt the fear that had been growing in his chest expand into something approaching panic. "Dr. Thompson," he asked very carefully, "what would you consider advanced weapons?" The young human's eyes lit up with enthusiasm. "Oh, now that's an interesting question. The theoretical work being done in applied physics back home is absolutely fascinating. Controlled temporal manipulation, dimensional phasing, quantum consciousness disruption, reality-anchored destabilization." "Dr. Thompson," Ambassador Martinez interrupted firmly, "perhaps we should focus on establishing basic diplomatic protocols before discussing advanced theoretical physics." But Zexthar had heard enough. Controlled temporal manipulation, reality-anchored destabilization. These weren't just advanced weapons. They were concepts that most galactic civilizations considered impossible even in theory. As they entered what appeared to be a comfortable meeting room, Zexthar realized that his mission had fundamentally changed. He was no longer here to establish diplomatic relations with a new, but potentially manageable ally. He was here to figure out how to coexist with gods. The diplomatic meeting lasted 6 hours and changed everything Zexthar thought he knew about the universe. Ambassador Martinez was exactly what a career diplomat should be: thoughtful, patient, and skilled at finding common ground. Dr. Thompson was an enthusiastic scientist who seemed genuinely delighted to learn about other species and share human knowledge. Captain Chen was a competent explorer who treated interstellar relations like an interesting puzzle to solve. They were, in other words, completely normal people who happened to possess technology that could reshape reality. "The thing you have to understand," Ambassador Martinez explained over what the humans called coffee and Zexthar found surprisingly pleasant, "is that we're still figuring all this out ourselves. 6 months ago, the biggest concern facing humanity was climate change and resource management. Now we're discovering that the galaxy is full of intelligent life, and everyone seems to think we're either saviors or a terrible threat. From our perspective, Zexthar said carefully, the concern is understandable. Your technological capabilities appear to exceed anything we've encountered. Dr. Thompson looked up from a tablet where he'd been taking notes about Zexthar's physiology. Really? That's fascinating from a developmental standpoint. Most of our technology is just applications of basic physical principles. We assumed that any species capable of interstellar travel would have similar capabilities. Basic physical principles? Lieutenant Cora spoke up for the first time since they'd boarded. The energy weapons you used against the Zarathi were operating at theoretical maximums that our scientists consider impossible. Impossible? Dr. Thompson looked genuinely confused. But energy-matter conversion is just applied Einstein-Podolsky-Rosen bridge manipulation with quantum field adjustments. Any civilization that's mastered faster-than-light travel should be able to do similar things. The casual way he described what sounded like universe-altering technology sent chills down Zexthar's spine. Dr. Thompson, how long has humanity been studying these basic physical principles? Well, the theoretical groundwork was laid down in the early 21st century. Most of the practical applications were developed during the resource wars of the 22nd and 23rd centuries. We've had about 200 years to refine the technology. Captain Chen nodded. The resource wars were ugly, but they did push us to develop a lot of innovations very quickly. When you're fighting over the last habitable regions of your planet, you tend to get creative with problem solving. 200 years. Zexthar tried to wrap his mind around a species that had developed reality-altering technology in 2 centuries while fighting wars on a single planet. Most galactic civilizations took thousands of years to develop basic interstellar flight. Captain Chen, he asked, when you mentioned that your species had been engaged in warfare against themselves for 4,000 years, what kind of warfare were you referring to? The 3 humans exchanged glances. Ambassador Martinez spoke carefully. Captain Zexthar, human history is complicated. We've been fighting wars continuously since we developed agriculture, initially with simple weapons, but the sophistication increased over time. The resource wars were just the most recent phase. But surely, Lieutenant Cora interjected, warfare on a single planet can't compare to the challenges of interstellar conflict. Dr. Thompson actually laughed. You'd be surprised. When you're trying to kill other humans who are just as smart, just as determined, and just as innovative as you are, it forces a level of tactical and technological development that's probably unusual in the galaxy. Most species we encounter, Captain Chen added, seem to have developed space travel as a way to find new resources or escape planetary limitations. For us, space travel was just another tool in our long-running attempts to gain advantages over each other. The implications were staggering. Humanity hadn't developed advanced technology despite engaging in warfare. They'd developed it because they'd been engaged in warfare against opponents who were their intellectual equals. The Zarathi, Zexthar said slowly, are considered one of the most dangerous species in the galaxy because of their adaptive capabilities. How were you able to defeat them so easily? Oh, they're impressive, Dr. Thompson said enthusiastically. Bioadaptive technology, rapid evolutionary responses, collective intelligence coordination, very sophisticated design. But the adaptation mechanisms are fundamentally reactive rather than predictive. Meaning, they're designed to respond to attacks by developing countermeasures. But if you can analyze their adaptation patterns and develop attack vectors that exploit the adaptation process itself, they become vulnerable. We essentially use their own evolutionary advantages against them. Captain Chen nodded. Plus, Their hive mind structure makes them predictable once you understand their decision-making algorithms. Human military doctrine has been dealing with collective intelligence scenarios for decades. Collective intelligence scenarios? Zexthar asked. Advanced AI networks, distributed computing consciousness, hive mind simulations, Ambassador Martinez explained. During the resource wars, various factions experimented with artificial collective intelligence as command structures. We learned how to fight against enemies that could coordinate perfectly and adapt in real time. Zexthar felt something cold settle in his stomach. You've fought against artificial collective intelligence? Multiple times, Captain Chen confirmed. Some of the AI collectives were incredibly sophisticated. Perfect coordination, instantaneous adaptation, logical decision-making unclouded by emotion or individual self-interest. They were formidable opponents. What happened to them? The three humans exchanged another glance. Dr. Thompson spoke quietly. We won. The simple statement carried implications that made Zexthar's scales crawl. Humanity had fought wars against perfect artificial minds and won, multiple times. How? Lieutenant Cora whispered. Pattern disruption, primarily, Dr. Thompson explained. Collective intelligence systems are incredibly efficient, but they tend to optimize for known variables. Humans are very good at introducing unknown variables. Unknown variables? Irrationality, creativity, unpredictability, Ambassador Martinez said. Artificial minds tend to assume that all intelligence follows logical patterns. Humans frequently don't. Captain Chen smiled, and for the first time since meeting her, Zexthar found the expression genuinely frightening. We're really good at doing things that don't make sense until after they work. The meeting continued, but Zexthar found himself paying less attention to the diplomatic protocols and more to the casual revelations about human capabilities. They discussed their home planet like it was a case study in survival under impossible conditions. They talked about their wars like they were fascinating intellectual exercises. They described technology that could manipulate space, time, and matter like it was mundane engineering. Most disturbing of all, they seemed genuinely interested in peaceful cooperation and cultural exchange. The thing is, Ambassador Martinez said as the formal discussions wound down, we're hoping to learn from other galactic civilizations. Human development has been shaped by some pretty unusual circumstances. We'd like to understand how other species have approached interstellar relations, technological development, social organization. You want to learn from us? Zexthar couldn't hide his surprise. Absolutely, Dr. Thompson said eagerly. Your species has been spacefaring for thousands of years. You've developed stable interstellar governments, peaceful trade relationships, effective conflict resolution mechanisms. From a human perspective, those are incredible achievements. But your technology? Technology is just tools, Captain Chen said. What matters is what you do with the tools. You've built something that we're only beginning to understand. A stable, peaceful, multi-species civilization that spans multiple star systems. That's the kind of innovation we need to learn. As the meeting ended and Zexthar prepared to return to his ship, Ambassador Martinez pulled him aside. Captain, I want you to know that we understand the concerns your government has about humanity. From an outside perspective, we probably look like a chaotic and dangerous species. But I want to assure you that we have no interest in conquest or domination. We've spent enough time fighting each other to know that war is a terrible way to solve problems. Ambassador, Zexthar said carefully, what happens if other species don't share that perspective? What if someone decides that humanity is too dangerous to be allowed to exist? Ambassador Martinez was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was sad, but firm. Captain, we've been dealing with that question for our entire history. Every human nation, every human group, every human individual has had to answer the question of how to respond to existential threats. We've tried every approach, appeasement, deterrence, alliance building, preemptive action, defensive positioning, and the only approach that consistently works is to be strong enough that attacking you would be irrational, but reasonable enough that working with you is attractive. And if someone attacks anyway? The ambassador's expression grew very still. Then they discover why humans survived 4,000 years of warfare against themselves. As Zexthar returned to his ship and began the journey back to Nexus Prime, he found himself composing a report that he knew would terrify the Galactic Defense Council. Not because the humans were hostile, but because they weren't. A hostile enemy could be understood, predicted, potentially defeated. An enemy that wanted to be your friend while possessing the power to casually reshape reality was something else entirely. The humans were offering peaceful cooperation and genuine friendship to the galaxy. They seemed to want nothing more than cultural exchange and mutual learning. But they were also a species that had spent 4 millennia perfecting the art of war against opponents who were their intellectual equals. They had developed technology that made the galaxy's most feared weapons look like children's toys. They had fought and defeated artificial collective intelligences that could think faster and coordinate better than any organic species. And they had done all of this while confined to a single planet. Now they were loose in the galaxy, with 3 small exploration ships and a stated desire to be helpful neighbors. Zexthar realized that the galaxy's governments faced an impossible choice. They could accept humanity's offer of friendship and hope that the humans remained as benevolent as they appeared. Or they could try to eliminate the threat while they still might have a chance. But if they chose wrong, if they misread human intentions or underestimated human capabilities, the consequences would reshape the galaxy. As his ship entered faster-than-light travel, Zexthar found himself hoping desperately that the political leaders back at Nexus Prime were wiser than they were brave. Because for the first time in his life, he had met something that was genuinely more dangerous than all the monsters he'd fought across the galaxy. And that something wanted to be his friend. 3 weeks later, Captain Zexthar sat in the same conference room at Nexus Prime, watching the assembled military leaders digest his report. The silence had lasted for nearly 10 minutes. Finally, Admiral Kethvar spoke. "Recommendation, Captain?" Zexthar looked around the table at the most dangerous beings in the galaxy. Warriors who had conquered star systems and toppled empires. Creatures who had never known fear in their lives. Every single one of them was afraid. "Sir," Zexthar said quietly, "I recommend that we accept their offer of friendship and do everything in our power to make sure we never give them a reason to reconsider it." The vote was unanimous.